Well, hello. Thank you very much for doing this with me. This is my third and hopefully final podcast we'll end up seeing, but I got both Dr. Besmer and Father Clancy here. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Tim Clancy. I'm a Jesuit here in the philosophy department, and my area of research and teaching is at the intersection of philosophy technology and the philosophy of religion. So my focus on virtual technologies and AI in particular is questions of morality, but also questions of meaning, because religion is about meaning and identity, which is a little bit different than questions about justice. So my interest is in meaning and identity. And I was former honors director for 15 years, starting in 2002. And I recruited Kirk to help me teach a philosophy of technology course that we kind of created out of thin air in 2006 or so.
Yeah.
So that's me.
Yeah. Excuse me. I'm Kirk Besmer. I'm a professor of philosophy at Gonzaga, and my research interest has turned more and more towards philosophy of technology. What I'm most interested in is the intersection of digital technologies and in issues of embodiment. So I'm interested in how the bringing the digital into our embodied experience of ourselves in the world changes those experiences.
Yeah. And what classes are you guys teaching right now?
Well, right now we're teaching the honors Philotech course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for the Philotech course, so when I took it, ChatGPT wasn't really quite there yet. It had just started that year. Do you guys have a policy set in place for kind of the use of AI in essays?
No.
No.
I don't even think we need to define a policy. Yeah. If we think somebody's using ChatGPT, we might approach them. But in general, like in my other class, in philosophy of religion and technology, and in the human nature class I teach, which is on the coevolution of humanity and its technologies, I do have a little spiel where I say, use it, but I'm warning you, ChatGPT has not taken this course. So it doesn't know what I think is important.
Yeah.
And to the extent that my course is creative, it's going to miss. Mm-hmm. So a good answer to a question on a test might not be a good answer for this class.
I see. Okay.
So don't trust ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You've got to be critical about it, and it could lead you down the wrong path if it answers a question along a line that isn't in collaboration with the lines I'm taking in the course. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So I just want to say one thing about the ChatGPT. So it was roughly 2 years ago, it was introduced, right?
Yeah.
And then the following semester, which was the spring of 2023, we started the course. Well, we like to start the course with technologies that are for which the students will have strong intuitions of,
yes,
but yet are not yet fully decided. So, for example, this fall we started with grief bots. So anyway, we started that spring of 2023, and the students hadn't quite played around with it enough, and so we did a demonstration in class and sort of the stuff it would do, and I think it freaked them out a little bit. So
yeah.
that first semester, it was clear the students kind of didn't want to talk about it too much because they were still unsure. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the experience I call the technological uncanny, when you see a technology that you realize you're going to have to change the way you understand the world because of this technology, and it's uncomfortable. So that was January 2023. We would not have that problem today, right? So students are not freaked out by this anymore. So just in that short period of time, in less than 18 months, it's really just become taken for granted as a part of the education landscape.
Well, I know for me, whenever I took the class, one of the most uncomfortable things that I had to do was watch the movie Her that you guys had assigned.
Yeah.
And that was, okay, this is something that's, it's a weird thing. And then we talked about the use of AI in terms of emotional support and intimacy. And
it's about a guy falling in love with his operating system.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. And And now we have voice AI, and we have people who are falling in love, and we have people that are even getting depressed because they're talking to these chatbots, either thinking they're humans or understanding that they can't talk to another.
So can you imagine this? When that movie came out, it was about 10 years ago?
2014.
So exactly 10 years. It was sci-fi.
Yeah.
Today, it's not sci-fi. It's reality.
Yeah, it's
That's
weird.
how fast this field is moving.
Well, I mean, even specifically, OpenAI got sued by Scarlett Johansson because of the voice being similar, which was just absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah.
Her was an interesting movie to say the least. But I guess in terms of the teaching profile of the class, then, so you guys don't really have a policy on AI, but I'm assuming you don't want students to just have AI write all their papers.
I grade what I see. ChatGPT is not going to get you an A paper.
I see. Okay.
And for honors kids, that's the table stakes.
No, I think I agree. And now you mention it, because I also teach reasoning, and I don't have a policy there either, but I don't see how ChatGPT really helps you there. In fact, I use ChatGPT in the class when I introduce the difference between induction and deduction, because ChatGPT continues to get it wrong. And so I point out to them, look, if you don't know a field and you use ChatGPT, you're not going to know when it's getting it wrong or when it's hallucinating.
Yeah, I was actually, my last podcast was Dr. Hogel, who does a lot of proof-based mathematics, and so we were talking about, I remember modus ponens and et cetera.
Hallelujah.
We were talking about that AI is able to write like it knows what it's talking about, but it doesn't actually know what it's talking about, which for the person who is maybe just learning a topic or who doesn't know much about a topic, it sounds right, but it can definitely be very, very wrong.
Yeah.
Which is...
I'm also...
It's basically predictive analytics, right? I mean, it's a sentence completion program.
Yeah.
So it doesn't understand anything.
Yeah.
Right.
But I've used it. I'm also teaching a graduate class in early French phenomenology, and we get into some pretty arcane stuff in Sartre and Merleau-Ponty. And so I've been just trying it out, taking key concepts from those texts and putting it in there and saying, explain this. And I'm surprised. At times it nails it, gets it right on. But then there'll be these weird conflations where instead of talking about Sartre, all of a sudden it starts bringing in Heideggerian terms, which isn't completely a category mistake, but it's a little bit suspect.
Yeah.
So I'm the more I use it in areas that I know, I'm impressed with what it can do, but also I recognize the blind spots it has, and it just doesn't. It doesn't know when it's making mistakes because it doesn't know when it knows.
Yeah. So it can't give it. So it would help. I don't know if it could do this, but it could help if it could give you a reliability percentage. Like this answer is 90% reliable, or I've got a 90% confidence in this answer. I've got a 50% confidence in this answer, because it's not going to tell you when it doesn't know something. It's just going to tell you stuff.
And when you say help, do you mean help the student and, let's say, get a right answer, get a good grade, or help as in help the student understand and learn?
Well, I would say in terms of functionally using it, right? So I'm in a job and I got to write a report, and I use ChatGPT to help me write that report. It would be nice to know what kind of confidence level that report has that I'm getting from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But I don't see how it would identify, because that would mean it's identifying its own hallucinations.
Right.
I just don't. So that's the difference between having somebody write you the report and having ChatGPT write you the report. Is the guy writing the report could assess. He says, I got about a 60% confidence level that I'm accurate here.
Yeah.
I've got sufficient evidence to have that kind of confidence.
And this is what I'm wondering about the hallucinations, if that's just always going to be a part of the system, right? I mean, when it first came out, I thought, well, let me see if I can use this to do literature reviews, right? So I typed in.
Oh, what a great idea!
Yeah, so I typed in a topic on an area of research I was doing. It's a guy named Merleau-Ponty, and it came back with some sources that I hadn't thought of, I didn't know existed. But it also mentioned a source by a guy I know, he doesn't write on Merleau-Ponty, he writes on this other guy, Husserl. And there's a book title. It has a book title, the author, the publisher, and the date. And I went and looked it up, and this book doesn't exist. In fact, the guy I know got out of academia in like 2010 or 11. This was 2016. The thing I thought was interesting, though, is it's the kind of book he could have written, right? So it was a reasonable,
predictive.
It was a reasonable hallucination, you know.
Well, did you? I don't know if you guys have heard about the lawyer thing that happened. Where the two lawyers used ChatGPT and then I don't know if they got disbarred or fired, but
I don't know how that case ended up because this happened within a couple months, or at least one case happened within a couple months of its release.
Well, I don't know how professionals are using it, but I'm sure the pressure is on to avoid having to read a lot of stuff. So I would bet, and who knows maybe the hallucinations are more circumscribed because if you put into a ChatGPT, 16-page decision letter and say, summarize this in bullet points, it would seem to me that the hallucinations there could be minimized.
Yeah. Well, the problem this guy had is it cited 8 cases for precedents,
and none of them.
and the judge checked them out. None of them existed. Yeah.
But so for the usage of, let's say, ChatGPT or generative AI in general in the classroom, do you think that it can only be harmful either because they're hallucinating, or do you think it can be helpful?
No. In fact, we have to teach people how to use this because they're going to use it in their job.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know how to create a prompt that's going to generate useful information, you're going to be in a disadvantage looking for a job. So we've got to teach people how to use this, but how to use it critically rather than how to cut and paste.
Yeah.
It's like critical reasoning. This is another field we need to train people in. Is how to use critically and effectively these new digital technologies. It should be another course in the core. To complement reasoning and speech, there should be a digital course.
I think that makes sense. I think that having even if it's not focused on AI solely, just having a digital ethic. Oh, you mean focus solely on AI?
No.
Okay.
I mean, social media.
Yeah.
Fake news. Chat GPT.
Yeah. I think that
There's plenty of topics.
might be very helpful. Although it was interesting to me to see that a lot of students. So this is like a study of one college, not a large sample size. I can't remember the exact one, but essentially it said that the majority of students who anonymously reported said that they used ChatGPT not because they wanted to cheat, but because they felt like they would get behind of the other students who got away with it.
Yeah, there we go.
And it's a little bit tough for me to figure out whether that's good or bad, because although I agree that it's probably we need to learn how to use it, we need to learn how to use it responsibly. I think that there is definitely something lost, especially in the learning process, when you even use it to start your paper, to get ideas for a thesis or to write it.
Well, in my day, there were Cliff Notes, right? So in a literature class, and you have to read this novel, you could also buy the Cliff Notes version of that novel and not read the novel, but have actually a better understanding of the novel than somebody who would read the novel the first time through, I would say. So this is an AI version of Cliff Notes. And what did literature professors think of using Cliff Notes? Probably didn't like it.
Yeah. No, I would use, when I first started teaching and I would teach texts that had Cliff Notes, I would read what the Cliff Notes said. So I knew I could spot when the students would be cribbing from it.
Yeah.
But I do agree that it has a reading on a reading, right? So
Good.
I would look at the Cliff Notes and I would find that my way of approaching it, because if I'm using a novel in a philosophy class, I'm coming at it differently than. Yeah. So I don't know if that would be true with with a large language model, because they can curate more clearly towards what your interests are.
No, this is exactly what's true.
Yeah.
Because when I first talked about AI, I even said you might think about using AI as a rough draft of your answer, right? But I stopped giving that advice because several people flunked because AI took them on a path that we weren't walking in that class, right? And Cliff Notes, they're not taking the class either.
Right. Right. I mean, I know one of the literature professors last fall had the students, he would give them a paper prompt, so he'd have the students put it into ChatGPT or Claude, I think he was using. And then he had the students comment on
Oh.
how accurate. And so that was a nice way to show students, right,
Yeah.
how to use this or the limitations. And I asked him, how did it go? And he said, well, it was a good experiment, but I read a lot of ChatGPT papers. And he's a literature professor, and the style of ChatGPT is no point of view, kind of vanilla. And he said, I just couldn't do it again. I can't read ChatGPT papers anymore because
Really?
he finds them so. Because there's not a point of view, and it's just a sort of 30,000 feet. Yeah, it's really vanilla sort of writing. So, but I thought it was an interesting and creative way to go to let students see its limitations.
So the first full semester that ChatGPT was out, I was teaching that human nature course on humanity and its technologies, and the final essay question. I always give take-home essay exams, and the final essay question was, put this question into ChatGPT and evaluate its answer. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to grade you on how you evaluate ChatGPT, and I want you to give it a grade.
Yeah.
Everybody gave it a grade in B minus. Mm-hmm. I think 1 out of 30 gave it an A minus.
Really?
So it was communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What kind of grade do you want in this course? Yeah. You know? But they were, it's early days, so they were pretty cynical about it.
Yeah.
But I think just even have students evaluate.
Yeah.
That's how you learn to be critical.
Yeah.
Right.
You learn this is the kind of stuff you're going to get if you use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I think also being the philosophy kind of department makes it uniquely special in that
That's true.
It's harder for ChatGPT to, let's say, write about a philosophy paper than it is to write about a math paper, I would say.
Well, or a history paper.
Yeah.
I think history's got a real problem. Yeah. And English, I don't know if they've figured it out.
Yeah.
But philosophy, it's so creative.
It can quote Heidegger, or it can quote all the, like, Kant, but it can't understand what they're trying to say.
And that's going to come through.
Yeah, and also the way it works, the way I found it when I use it is it's really annoying that it uses bullet points. So already there's a how do I put it?
Never use bullet points in an essay or an exam question.
Yeah,
because that's a red flag.
Yeah.
So even if you think that way, don't use bullet
I had never heard of bullet points being used like that before.
But it's weird because when I ask it questions, especially on the philosophic topics, say explain this concept in Husserl, I get bullet points, and the bullet points just that is a way of presenting information that is not akin to showing deep thinking.
Interesting.
So if you're going to use the bullet points to develop a paper, you really have to connect them, and that's where the thinking happens. So I'm not sure ChatGPT or the large language models would work in that sort of environment.
So it seems that you've been kind of putting in some of the papers or some of the ideas that you've either been teaching students or been looking into your own into ChatGPT. Do you think that AI can be used as a tool for philosophical inquiry?
Well, so what I would do is I would take a topic in Husserl, which is kind of arcane, right? So explain this concept in Husserl, and it would give me bullet points and say, would you like me to elaborate on any of these? And so I would say yes, and I would have it elaborate on each one. I was trying to get it to the point where either it starts repeating itself or it's clearly cannot make any more connections, and that was about a 2-step process. But what it allowed me to do was sometimes it helped me kind of put if not a lecture together, put together the points I wanted the students to come away with, right? So if you take a complex concept of Husserl, like the life world, this is meant in many ways in his work. Yeah. And I could sit down and write up a lecture and go to a reading where that's a central point. But I might forget some bits because this is a concept that comes up a lot. And so ChatGPT might remind me, oh yeah, here's another way in which it's understood. So in that way, I can see it being used to facilitate philosophy insofar as philosophy requires some lecturing and information transfer. But really the whole point of a philosophy course is to cultivate a certain kind of thinking in the students and reading, right? So in that way, I don't think it's going to be that helpful.
What about in research?
That's what I was trying to do. So I haven't done it. I used it this first time to do a lit review. And I thought, like I said, other than this hallucination, I thought it did a competent job, but I just listed, I said on this topic in Merleau-Ponty list I think I said list 10 sources, 5 books, and 10 articles. And the book was where it's hallucinating, but the articles there were genuine articles there that I didn't know about. So
they can be helpful in using.
Yeah, but it'd also be helpful. I mean, it's the sort of thing that I suppose if I went to the library website and used their search engine, I would probably come up with similar results.
Do you think it's ethical to use it for anything beyond find me this
This is
source?
interesting. Yeah, so I also am the editor or the executive editors of a journal on philosophy of technology. And we received, I believe it was a ChatGPT generated paper shortly after its release, which for a philosopher of technology, this is just catnip, right? I want to see if I can get this by. And the reason I flagged it as this is even before the detectors came out. The reason I thought it was suspicious is the person was writing, and one part of the paper had the history of the word technology, which is, it's a fine thing to do. But there was an author who wrote probably the definitive book on this topic, not there. And so that led me to believe, well, this is either a person who didn't do their research or this is generated by a machine that doesn't know this author. And because the book is old, the book is from the 90s. So I sent it to my co-editor and managing editor and said, I think this is ChatGPT, and we agreed. And so we desk rejected it, but that prompted us to have a policy within probably a month of ChatGPT coming out. Our journal had a policy that any large language model use has to be noted. We haven't had that yet, but we have had papers where we suspect there was some ChatGPT or some large language model used, and we ran it through a detector, and sure enough, there was parts of the paper that were composed by it, and the person didn't note that.
So I guess, as you had said, that it's okay, not that it's okay, but that we're going to be using AI in the industry, and so we should learn how to use it there. Why is it somewhat different in an academic paper when you're writing it to use that as a tool? Because that's their industry.
Yeah. Well, I think I suspect the person used ChatGPT because English was not their first language, and it would be
that's a huge help.
Yeah, it's a cheap and easy way to get your ideas across in English. I mean, it's really, really hard for non-native English speakers to be publishing philosophy at a high level, and so I'm very sympathetic to their desire to get a leg up.
Okay,
but I don't know if in principle that is a problem. If somebody said, "Look, I wrote this passage in German and had it translate it for me," I don't know if there's a problem with that per se, but you have to note that, and that's the part that we objected to, is the person didn't note that they had used a large language model for that.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, so
and that's one use that I'm hoping to get into, is because in some of my earlier research in hermeneutics, there's stuff in German that's never been translated, and so I was thinking, well, I could do a ChatGPT translation, check the translation, and post it on my academia website for general use. Yeah. And I just think that's a great idea. I haven't done it yet. I don't know how much work it's going to be checking, but their translations are getting better and better and better.
Yeah. I think that, all aspects of AI are getting better with time. You can see that they're testing things like Gemini versus OpenAI against like graduate level physics and math, and that they keep improving. So I don't think there'll ever come a point where they're going
still
to
in pharmaceutical research.
Yeah.
Right? It's predicting all these protein folds.
Yeah. And it's actually very helpful.
Yeah.
But I don't think it'll ever get to the level of being able to think the same as a PhD working for 20 years would. I think that
It's going to have to get sentient.
Yeah.
I think that there's a level of criticality, I think, that because it's simply predictive analysis, that it won't be able to ever hit. But in terms of using the AI in the classroom, do you think it should be used more so than just to organize thoughts for what you want to tell students?
I think we're going to get to the point. First of all, teachers have to learn it, right? But I think we're going to get to the point where it's part of the class to learn how to use ChatGPT in this area, and maybe it's a 1-credit class on the side, ChatGPT in philosophy, ChatGPT for history, ChatGPT for bioscience, right? But just like we have 1,000 different statistics courses, we might have 1,000 different intros to ChatGPT for this purpose. And of course, now it's going to be AI companions rather than text ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
You're going to talk to your AI companion and then ask him to kind of summarize the discussion and,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was. I was talking to one of the other professors, and it was interesting that, like, well, what if we were able to create, let's say, TAs for classes based off of the content of the course?
Yeah, this is, I mean, for large state universities with 300 kids in the class, this is going to replace TAs.
The only question that they had was issues with FERPA, because if you're giving student data to it to help it, how does that handle or coincide or reconcile itself with?
You just have to have a dedicated Chat GPT. It would have to be a small language model rather than a large language model, and you develop it in your university or you develop it for that course, right? And then it's walled off to the degree that anything's walled off on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people are doing therapy online, right?
Yeah.
You just go to a encrypted site, so you'd have to have an encrypted small language model or something like that. I mean, that's what Altman is talking about. And we did a webinar with MIT last May, and they're saying that's the future of AI is going to small language models, because a large language model, it just takes too much power to use a language model that can write about anything.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that it was private tech companies that were now leading the nuclear charge for energy?
Right. Exactly.
Right? After so many decades of it being such a, vilified energy source, and now it's Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta leading the charge. I think it was it Amazon or was it Microsoft that I thought bought the 3 Mile Island reactor?
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So, they're starting.
So ChatGPT, they're worried about running out of data to train on, and they're also worried about running out of power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if what you say is true, though, and that we're going to definitely reach a point where AI is going to start replacing these educators, I mean, in the form of TA. I mean, I'm a TA. I wouldn't consider myself an educator per se. But do you think
Well, a grader.
Yeah.
You know, you could still run small group discussions, answer kids' questions, stuff like that. But in terms of grading, which is always the toughest part of teaching.
Yeah.
Whether or not it is going to happen, is that a good thing, though?
That's a good question.
Well, it's not a good thing if I want to get my doctorate paid for by the school, right? Is it a good thing in terms on the student side? I don't think it's going to be any worse than having a TA grade the papers.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we mentioned this. We asked the students this last year. I don't know if you remember. I asked the question because they were talking about using kind of what's wrong with using ChatGPT to write a paper if it helps me. And my response was, well, what's wrong with me using ChatGPT to grade your paper if it helps me? And they seem to not like that idea very much.
Yeah, it creates this pretty weird dynamic that, you know, if a student uses ChatGPT to write and the teacher uses ChatGPT to grade, then it's never gone through consciousness. This answer's never gone through consciousness.
I mean, that already happens in the job market. I don't know if you've seen the arms race that's already started happening, where students will write thousands of cover letters using ChatGPT. And because of that, HR people are overwhelmed, and so they use ChatGPT to grade it. So you have these whole sets of applications and denials or acceptances without a human ever having looked at it.
Wow. So this is another question I asked, I think just yesterday in the course, we were talking about this, and we were talking, I don't know how this came up, but I asked the students, would you mind if you got a response from a professor that was written by ChatGPT, right, to an ordinary question?
Or like a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, we talked about letters of recommendation. And they didn't like the idea that an email would be responded by ChatGPT. And I think the point that you're just going to have to, I suspect that's going to happen, but you're going to have to hide that it was a large language model.
Teachers, I'd bet dollars to donuts. Teachers are already writing letters of recommendation with ChatGPT.
Well, interestingly, I've talked to some professors, and they've said that actually some of their research papers they've submitted, some of the peer reviews for it, have sounded like the peer reviews themselves have been
Peer
written,
reviews.
have been written using AI.
Yikes.
So ChatGPT is evaluating your work.
Yeah,
That's spooky.
Hopefully they're more polite than some of the reviewers are, though, because reviewers can be pretty hard.
Can they?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, and so if it were to expand beyond TAs, though, do you think that there's anything lost if it were to, let's say, replace teachers?
Well, online,
Yeah.
if it hasn't already, it's gonna.
Yeah.
Right? So MOOCs, right? Which is massive online open courses that you don't necessarily have to pay for, but you could pay for it to get a certificate. So all the big universities have these, like MIT, Stanford. They got these MOOCs with a couple thousand students, maybe 10,000 students, taking it asynchronously. I could see them using, they're either going to have to hire people. If you're going to assign work, you're either going to have to hire a whole boatload of people to evaluate that work, or you run it through ChatGPT. And that's what's going to happen. And that's probably what's already happening.
Well, not even evaluate it. I mean, like teach a class.
Well, anything that could be.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the way a lot of these large, a lot of the MOOCs work is the class is designed by a human, and then usually their lectures are videotaped and they're repeatable. I mean, so anything that can be routinized, I imagine, can be led. You know, you can have ChatGPT to some level. I suppose you could have it put together a lecture for you on a topic, but I think
It would be better just to videotape yourself giving the lecture, and then you've got it for eternity. And that's going to be better than a ChatGPT lecture.
Perhaps, although, let's say, I mean, just as books come out with editions. Not to say that many.
That's a good point.
Not to say that editions don't necessarily aren't just re-released to make students pay money,
Right.
but if an edition changes because something radically different and information comes to light,
But
the AI will immediately see that because 3 seconds ago a research paper was released and it'll analyze that and say, hey,
Well,
was this
but
right?
the language models aren't that up to date.
Yes, right now they don't synchronously update. They just have a cutoff point. But I mean,
That day will come. Yeah.
eventually that day will come. Not to say that we can't think about the here and today, where it does have a cutoff point, but like 2021 or
I
whatever.
thought GPT-4 was connected to the internet because I've asked.
Okay, maybe ChatGPT 4.
It is, yeah. I think it
Okay.
is because I asked for.
If you pay, maybe.
Yeah, I pay.
Okay.
I have
Yeah,
a paid
premium.
account. Yeah, so I have a paid account and I asked it questions and it sent me to the internet.
Yeah. So
I have a general policy of always getting the paid service because then I know how they're making money
yeah.
off me.
I believe the way it works, at least with GPT, is so it still has a cutoff point, but because it has so much information,
Oh,
it can't
I see.
query the entire internet every time it asks you a question.
Yeah.
So it has access to the internet that it can probably query against if it needs to,
Right.
but it has still a cutoff point
Okay,
of its
okay.
information.
Okay.
But I mean, the idea of a AI replacing you, unsettling or inevitable?
Oh, I don't.
AI is not going to take your job. Somebody who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. Because this was another thing that came out strong in that webinar is that AIs are most useful as companions rather than as doing the job all by itself.
So you think that like the educator is safe from
Well,
being?
so you could think of the educator might become an organizer, right?
Okay.
It might be somebody who knows how to use the
Oh, God.
the
Yeah, these outcomes assessment people have already said teaching is grading,
yeah.
you know.
So I mean, if you put the course together, and then use the ChatGPT to generate resources for that might, in that sense, you might replace the professor if you have one manager and you get rid of two other teachers, you might. But I think you're not going to get rid of the teachers completely.
Yeah.
You know. Also, the question is, what are students going to want? Are they going to want to pay for a program to be teaching them? I don't think.
Well, as we learned in COVID, you got to hold students' attention,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that ChatGPT is going to hold somebody's attention because it's not creative.
Yeah.
And it is kind of, I find its answers to be kind of textbook-like answers. In other words, really prosaic and dumbed down.
Maybe not the greatest rebuttal to that because it lost a lot of forward momentum, but there are YouTubers who have an AI who has imitated their voice play a game, and it all publishes it, no human involved.
Wow.
And that gains still views.
Okay.
So I think that it will, if not now, soon be able to at least.
And what would be the motive in watching that? To learn game skills?
What is the motive for people to watch what they do right now?
Well,
TikTok brain, right?
This is the question I've asked my students. Would you read a novel that you knew was written by ChatGPT? Mm-hmm. I never would, because I don't give a damn what ChatGPT generates on some plot. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in what a human being has written about it, because that's getting into their. So this is an intentionality approach to hermeneutics.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about the strike last year by the screenwriters.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They're worried they're going to get replaced.
Yeah.
And I do think the way some of those shows get put out by Netflix and they are formulaic. Netflix knows what you're going to want to watch, and so insofar as those kinds of shows are formulaic,
like third season.
Well, I'm thinking of the shows
really
that
formulaic
that Netflix puts together. I think the one I don't remember the one, but it was had Nicole Kidman in it, and the whole show was written by humans, but it was after they had assessed all these other shows that were really popular. What were the things that made the shows popular? Mm-hmm. And so they kind of just cobbled together this show like making a batch of brownies, where they just put all the ingredients in there, right? So I take it that's what ChatGPT is worried about. And I remember reading an article, must have been a year or so ago, about a screenwriter who put ideas in ChatGPT, and he said it was pretty impressive what he saw. So I don't know if you didn't know it was ChatGPT, right? I mean, I get the idea that I wouldn't want to read a novel that I knew was written by a large language model, but suppose I read a novel and I thought it was really good, and then it was revealed to me that it was written by that. I don't know. Would that bother me? I don't know.
That's a really good question. I mean, hopefully I would still think it's a good novel.
Yeah.
Right? But part of what makes it a good novel is learning about the world from somebody else's point of view.
Yeah.
If you don't have a point of view.
Right, you can't.
But would that still apply if it was, let's say, a student essay, and it was a really good essay that you would say, this is 100% great essay, and then he came to you in office hours and said, I did no work, I just gave it a prompt and it wrote the whole thing for me.
Well,
Would you still give them the A?
Well, maybe ask this question: Is that an A paper? Right, because that's a different question. Mm-hmm. Because if you'd say, well, I wouldn't want to give them an A because I would want them to do their own work, but the question would just be, is this equivalent to an A paper?
Yeah.
And
I don't want to be an investigator. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm like this on plagiarism too. Yeah. I'm not going to check for plagiarism. I'm going to grade what I see.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to go through all the work involved.
Yeah. Well, this is assuming that they went up and told you.
But you could tell them then, well, the cost of this is you haven't learned anything. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you've paid X thousand of dollars to take this course. Yeah. I hope you don't need it in your job because you haven't learned anything.
Well, I mean, this is the other thing about when I think about philosophy and what does a philosophy course do for non-philosophers? And I think it can do a lot. And one is it teaches you ways to think and ways to read and ways to critically analyze. And if you use ChatGPT, you just don't get any of that. And so I'm kind of with Tim on this, that if students want to use ChatGPT to complete their papers, and they're sort of cheating themselves out of this opportunity that they supposedly want. It is a violation of the academic code and all that, and so that's should be taken seriously. But I think the real damage is that the students themselves haven't developed the skills that we want them to develop in say writing a paper with a Philitech research paper, right? Mm-hmm.
I mean, as an employer, I mean, let me put it. I would hate to undergo surgery from a surgeon who learned on ChatGPT.
Perhaps, but would you be more okay with an AI performing your surgery?
That's a different story.
It depends on the surgery. If it's a completely routine surgery, I probably would be fine with that.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, even if it wasn't, it would be a surgeon that never has to sleep, never has to eat, that doesn't get a shaky hand.
Well, I know now,
and has no compassion.
Yeah,
true,
and no empathy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, to the extent that bedside manner matters, even in surgery.
Really,
I said to the extent that it does.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Not to, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know that a lot of these, they'll call them robot-assisted surgeries. The robot does a lot more than just assist in the surgeries, and you want that because of the way the hands of the robot,
Yeah.
or I don't know what to call that robot, the way they can work as much smaller than human hands, then they do less damage, and so
At some point, I want my surgeon to care about me.
yeah.
You know, that he's just that the robot isn't just going to take the most efficient.
Well, couldn't they bring in the care person? Right? We keep the human around for care, but the robot does the work.
That could work.
Yeah, I mean that might be a way to go.
Yeah, it's so I'm dating right now a nurse, and it is actually a common argument that we have, which is that I truly think that maybe not in the next 10 years, but I think in the next 20, 30 years, we're going to see AI and machines in general start to take over a lot of the responsibilities of nurses and doctors.
Yeah.
I think that, as you say, the human is gonna be kept around more so for the bedside manner, for the emotional connection, but they won't be doing any of the real work, I think.
And if the
they won't be doing the scientific work.
Yeah.
They'll be doing the real work.
Yes.
Which is caring for people.
well, I do think that that pretty much anything that can be routinized can be then taken up into can be automated digitally.
Yeah.
So, and insofar as a lot of what doctors and nurses do is incredibly routine. If you can get a machine that does that reliably, then I think that's better for the patient as well.
So whether it be teaching or learning, do you think that having it be automated is good or bad then?
You mean insofar as medicine is a lot of teaching and learning and hands-on stuff?
Well, just in total. I mean, whether it's you're going to med school, whether you're going to law school, or just getting your undergrad or doing research, if a lot of the stuff that's monotonous and you just kind of have to look at for papers and find that, like, so you're asking GPT for the articles. Do you think that you lost something and just asking GPT to find the articles rather than spending the 5-6 hours looking for them and maybe stumbling upon something completely different?
So the way you did this before we had any computers was really arduous, but also you looked at what other people cited, right? So there was, I mean, there's a skill that has been lost in academia forever, will be lost. And I was at the very tail end of this. So I had a professor who went to Yale, and part of the way he evaluated your paper is who you cited. So if you wrote a paper on a topic and you didn't cite, I don't want to say the right people, but if there were people that should have been cited and you didn't, then he had an understanding of where you're coming from and how strong your research was. Mm-hmm. So that's an old way where there's a kind of learned
Yeah, you're not going to get serendipity.
Yeah.
Right? So the extent to which you might come up, I mean, AI is going to give you what it asks, what you ask it, right? It's not going to tell you 5 ways you could have thought about it.
Yeah.
But if you're having to read through some articles to generate a bibliography, somebody might say something that you never thought of and totally changes how you're going to look at this. And you would never have gotten that from ChatGPT.
But similar to how we no longer need to just do straight up long division of polynomials from our head, or straight up not being able to not use a calculator because we have a calculator in our phones now, where math professors are like, don't use a calculator in this class. We won't have it.
Well, this is when I dropped out of math, was when it was Calc 2, and all I was doing was memorizing formula. I no longer understood what the hell was happening. Right. I couldn't imagine applications. This was back in the day when they didn't teach applications. I don't know if they do that now. I don't know if the new math has reached calculus, but I was going somewhere.
You were memorizing formulas.
Yeah, memorizing formulas. So that's what ChatGPT does, right? So yeah, you don't have to memorize the formulas. It's like once you start writing, you don't have to keep it in your head.
But do you think that, as you said, the skill that you lost, is that okay that's lost?
Well, it is, but it's so now we approach research differently. So what happens now is the worry is not am I getting the right sources, but have I exhausted all possible sources? Because now that's a possibility, right? So just to give you another example of this, another class I took in grad school, it was on this canned debate between Aquinas and this guy named Cajetan. And the guy teaching the course was the world's authority on this. And there were no There were no responses that he had not already heard or could anticipate. And so in that class, the assignment wasn't to actually write a paper. The assignment was to hand in an annotated bibliography and then give him a summary of the argument we would have made if we had written the paper. And I thought this was the craziest assignment ever. And you were graded on the correlation between who you cited and the argument you were going to make. Now, that made sense because the scholarship was delineated. And this guy had been writing on this for 20, 30 years, so he knew everything published, and there's not something coming out every week on this topic. So I thought that was an interesting skill to learn, to see the correlation between the sources I cited. So these would have been sources I would have cited in my paper, right? So that was the idea. I don't think you could do that course these days because the point isn't so much to have a clearly, how should I say this, a carefully curated list of sources.
Yeah.
It's to make sure you don't leave anybody out or any points of view out. Just let me finish on that idea. So what happens to research now is back when a decent number of citations in an academic paper would be 8 to 10, you could count on that the person had read those papers completely. Now, we routinely in TechNA have papers we cite with 45, 50 sources. I don't have a lot of confidence those people read those entire papers because that would be unrealistic. What they were doing is they were identifying that one topic they wanted and how they were going to cite it or use it, and then they moved on. So that's the way research happens now is there's just so much out there, and you can access it, and you should have a sort of synoptic view of everything. So then you have to be a little bit more careful.
Yeah.
I mean, just to follow on that, in the Philotech papers, when I read the annotated bibliographies, because I start with those, sometimes students cite that they read a whole book, and I thought, wow, did they read that whole book? I find that, and I asked a student once, and she said, well, I did, but I skimmed until I got to the parts I wanted, which that's what this kind of research leads you to is broad but shallow reading, whereas the older style of writing academic papers and citing it, I felt was deeper but smaller. You were in a smaller universe of discourse.
Yeah, I mean, so for the Philotech, actually, I actually had a book as my source, but the way it works is because I think we need 5?
Yeah, 5 sources.
5 annotated bibliographies. Yeah. Most of my content from that essay was from the one book, so I read the entire book through, and then I just clobbered 3 other sources that I was like, this is sort of related, and write an annotated bibliography, but it wasn't something that I really applied in my essay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see what's going to happen with, because if you use AI to find the sources, perhaps those sources will be more tailored to what you're looking for, but you don't know what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
So the definition of knowledge is shifting, right? In oral culture, you know what you can remember. In literate culture, you've got to be able to prove it to say you know it, right? You can believe all kinds of things, but you don't know it unless you can prove it. Today, I think you only know it if you can access and use it. You don't have to know the proof.
Yeah.
The engineer doesn't have to know the proof for these formula.
Yeah.
He needs to know how to access and use that formula when he needs to.
Yeah.
And that this is a formula he needs to use.
Yeah.
I would argue that someone somewhere needs to know the formula, though. Someone needs to be able to
It would
explain.
be bad. It would be a bad day if we no longer had anybody understanding what we're doing.
So
This is Husserl's worry in the crisis of the European
yeah.
sciences. But his worry was about just abstraction in general.
Yeah.
That once we lose the concrete, we lose something elemental.
yeah.
So
let's say everything given the same, everything's saying that, let's say an AI could teach a class just as well as you could teach a class. Do you think that there's something lost there?
Yeah, because it can't. And it can't because it can't hold the students' attention. I mean, this was my takeaway from COVID. Teaching is very dialogical. It's theater to a certain extent. And if I can't lock onto my students' eyes to know whether they're paying attention, I'm not going to be an effective teacher, because when I sense that they're not paying attention or their attention is drifting, I have to mix it up. I have to raise my voice. I have to do some gestures to try to get their attention back. ChatGPT doesn't know if people are paying attention.
doesn't care.
Doesn't care.
Yeah.
And so the students mirror that. The students don't care.
I mean, I'm thinking of other instances in which this might be interesting. Suppose ChatGPT or one of these large language models, you could get it to make musical compositions, right? And then you program it into a set of digital or electronic music making. Would people want to go to that concert? Would that be a concert somebody might want to go to?
The answer to that is actually yes.
Because people are doing it already?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a very famous Japanese, they're called Vocaloid.
Right.
Its name is Hatsune Miku.
Okay.
And it gets thousands and tens of thousands of people go to concerts, and these are entirely AI generated.
So that tells me that the attraction of the concert is to listen to music with other people, right?
It's to be part of the experience.
And that's what I'm wondering is what part of the classroom experience that I'm learning with my classmates. I think that's true. I think that's what students didn't like about COVID. But I don't think that would be sufficient for, I don't know, maybe some students. I mean, the question is, would students want to go to that class?
Yeah.
Right?
I think.
And that's why I was trying to use a concert analogy. But then when I think about when you go to a concert, part of the concert enjoyment is seeing with other people.
Yeah.
See, I mean, a teacher who sees his pedagogy as information dump,
Right. Yeah.
those aren't good teachers, right? And students don't like taking courses from them, right? But that's what ChatGPT is going to do. It's going to give you the information,
Yeah.
but not in the context of a relationship.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a large issue, especially with students, maybe more so after COVID, but I think just for time immemorial, is that, I mean, you have to take core classes at college,
Right.
and you may not want to, but there is a certain level of drive that's being enforced upon you by the fact that you're required to go that you might not otherwise need. I can guarantee that most people probably wouldn't take a philosophy class for core if they
Right.
didn't need to, but there's something valuable there.
Yeah.
Well, and we hire people who can generate interest, right? So a good teacher is going to start a core class with people not wanting to be there, not knowing why they got to take this. But job one for a teacher is to get them interested in the material.
Yeah. Which, I think that it's
So
kinda
on the
tough.
teacher evaluation at the end,
Yeah.
you get these comments of, I thought this was going to be a boring class. Surprisingly,
Yeah.
it wasn't. You know?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that can be a very big challenge because I mean
It is a big
for someone like you. Phenomenology is like
Yeah.
the coolest thing in the world, but for the average 100 level freshman coming in,
It's not. Well, I mean, the thing I think that what really makes this work, and what Tim is saying, we hire people, is you have to believe what you're doing is important, right? So I believe I'm just going to go off today and teach a reasoning course. I believe that's a really, really important course for our students, maybe one of the most important courses. And I tell them that. Now they may not believe it, but but I have to believe that, and I do believe that. So I think that's also what helps generate the interest is that when they can tell that the faculty member really believes this is important.
Yeah.
And I do think philosophy, if you study philosophy right, it can change your life and for the better. And if we don't have a colleague who, I think all our colleagues.
Somebody's phoning it in.
Yeah. So I don't think we get people who don't believe that. I would pretty much say all my colleagues believe philosophy is important, not just because it gives you good skills, which it does. It can teach you to read or write. Those are fine. But I really think it's a formation, right? We're trying to change our students, the way they see the world. And I think if you can come away from philosophy class thinking about the world as a philosopher would, there's some benefit to that.
Or thinking about questions you've never thought of before.
Yeah.
You know, things that you take for granted.
Yeah.
and I guess focusing a little bit, stepping away from philosophy and kind of going to religion. Do you think that AI is going to be useful in that sense?
It's very similar to philosophy, at least the way I teach religion. It's just another field of philosophy.
Yeah.
Or philosophy is just another way of doing religion, in my view. So I don't see a difference.
Really?
Yeah. And I teach this course on philosophy of religion and technology. Is it a philosophy course? It has a philosophy number. It could have a religious studies number, but it doesn't because I'm not in that department.
Yeah.
But I've got I teach Jesuits online, and some of those students are theologians, some of those students are philosophers.
And how do you see the philosophy department or philosophy as a whole kind of changing the next 10 years?
That's a really good question.
Boy,
Well,
AI.
Yeah, I hope so. So we've been doing this philosophy tech class since 2006, and at the time I was more straightforward. Research was straightforward in continental philosophy, and I kind of switched in 2010 because I thought, wow, this is really really important, and not many philosophers do it. So philosophy of technology in America, if you're not teaching philosophy at a technical university like Virginia Tech or Georgia Tech, where I have colleagues. No, you don't do philosophy of technology. There's a few like us that are at liberal arts or medium-sized multi-universities that do this, but a lot of the philosophy of technology came out of teaching ethics to engineers, right? And philosophy of engineering is a very large field as well, and it's getting larger. So what I hope happens to philosophy in the next 10 years is that more American philosophers realize philosophy of technology is a really important field for them to get into. And I think we're starting to see this. And so what AI can do is, I mean, philosophers have always been fascinated with AI from the beginning of AI, right? So for most of that time, philosophers have been the naysayers that you're not going to get, the whole big question was, are we going to get consciousness, or what is consciousness? And this is perfect for philosophers. And then the computer scientists, they also are, really smart engineers thinking about these things. And so the fight always was, is it going to be conscious or not? And that sort of ended. And I think what ChatGPT has done is shown everybody, and hopefully some philosophers, that this is an area that requires philosophic thought, right? Because we don't know what it is, right? So I'm hoping how these large language models can change is that philosophers start taking technology more general and more seriously as a philosophic topic.
Yeah.
Right. Because
and it changes how you look at the history of philosophy.
Yeah.
So in my philosophy, religion, and technology, I look at oral thought, scribal thought, print thought, broadcast thought, internet thought.
Yeah.
And traditional theological topics take a whole different look when you're thinking, these guys are having to remember everything they say. And that's going to shape how they think and what they think.
Yeah.
And that might be why things change,
Yeah. Yeah.
So modernity coincides with the printing press. Right? And general literacy. Without the printing press, I don't know that you'd ever get modernity.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if AI will be essentially Internet 2.0, the Gutenberg Press 2.0.
Yeah.
If it's going to be Fire 2.0.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Marshall McLuhan was the one that really hammered that.
Yeah. No, I think this is what we've been saying in the Philotech classes. This is a new technology, right? We're 30 years into digital technology, and the printing press took a long time to have its effects, but I do think it's having effects already. Yeah. I mean, I think misinformation is impossible without an internet.
Right.
I mean, you don't have if democracy is if modernity is a product of the printing press, then democracy is a product of the printing press. I don't think democracy goes so well with the internet, and that's that.
Yeah, the internet is pretty much an existential threat to democracy, as we're seeing
because it's subversive
this month.
Yeah, it's subversive. It's subversive to authoritative notions of information, right? So when you had the printing press, you didn't have any, and not anybody could publish. And what we started doing is you had vetters, right? Editors, publishers, and so there was already a built-in vetting system. But when the price of putting your stuff online is and when the algorithms privilege controversial, splashy stuff. I think that the real challenge to democracy. I think so. This is another reason why philosophers will study misinformation. This is a topic for them, but I don't think they tie it to the technology, right? So they'll ask about misinformation as if it's an epistemological problem, right, of knowledge. Right. And I think it is an epistemological problem of knowledge, but it's a problem that doesn't exist without the technology. Right, so this is another place where I really want philosophers to start looking at the technology, not just the effects of the technology. So what AI is already doing is exacerbating the worst parts so far of the internet.
Yeah,
right. The misinformation can now be spread much more rapidly. And as you were mentioning earlier, how am I gonna know what to believe in this if it's on the internet? And shocking how
that's why it's got to be a core course.
Yeah.
Just assessing sources.
All right. AI.
And I think they
101.
teach that in high school now, don't they?
Maybe. I know that they've radically changed early educational techniques to actually worse ones. Like instead of teaching the alphabet and syllables and that, they're now doing homophonics. And so you have
What's homophone?
so it's like you teach the word as a whole with how it sounds.
It's whole words, but yeah, I learned to read that way. It's a terrible way.
Yeah, and it's a just an inferior way of learning because when you see a word you haven't heard before or you haven't seen before, you're stuck.
Yeah. So this is a fight that goes back. It's been around since the 50s. The whole word versus non-whole word.
Yeah.
And whole word it had a vogue moment when I was learning to read, and it was really bad for me. In fact, I had to learn a foreign language which was written in a different alphabet to stop reading whole words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How soon is they're going to be taught is going to radically change in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one I'm wondering about this because when I think about high school teachers, they tend to enter early and stay long, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how fast. I'm not sure how fast the adaptation is going to trickle down, but I don't know. I mean, when I think about my high school teachers, all of them had been there from my brothers, were older than me, and they were still there for a couple decades afterwards. But I don't know how fast the stuff is getting adopted at the lower levels.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's
Particularly
all,
with the yuck factor,
Yeah.
right? If you're unfamiliar with it, it's like, this is BS.
yeah.
Is the first response.
Yeah.
You know?
But I do think that like university professors, they're going to have to skill up and figure out how to integrate it because the students are, you know.
Yeah. We'll see what ends up happening, but thank you very much for coming on. Do you guys have anything else that you guys want to say?
I don't have any final thoughts really.
All right. Well,
It's been a nice weave.
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully a nice break.
I mean,
before you all have to go back.
I like tying it back to education. I think that's a really good focus to think about because it's something that it really is emerging. In fact, I'm going to go back to my office and sign up for a webinar put up probably one of these book publishers on how to integrate AI.
No.
I mean, because this is something we got to learn, you know? Yeah.
No. All right.
All right.
I guess that'd be my final thought. We got to learn more, right? As educators.
Always.
Yeah.
It's a frightening field, philosophy of technology.
Yeah.
Books I bought 20 years ago,
Yeah.
you can pulp. They're like obsolete.
Yeah. 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 All right.
Well, thank you very much.